It still happens to some extent now, but do you remember when people used to make a really big deal about installing Arch Linux? Oh my god, installing Arch is so hard. It's going to take so much time. It's so difficult. And all you really need to do is just read the wiki. The really well-explained wiki. If you don't want to read, you could even just go watch one of the countless YouTube videos out there going over the installation process. And yes, I do think it is worth going through the manual process, knowing how your system fits together, knowing how to set some of those lower level things that a lot of distros just go and do for you if for whatever reason you ever need to go and modify them. But it had always just been a matter of being able to read and willing to spend a little bit of time doing so. Ever since those days, we've seen the rise of more and more of these distros that are really easy to install. Of course, nowadays, a lot of people talk about things like CashOS, but you have EndeavourOS, you have, of course, Manjaro, and there's a bunch of others as well, which all give you mostly a regular Arch, Manjaro the furthest from regular Arch, but mostly a regular Arch, just all automated in the background, and you don't really have to think about the installation process. But for a couple of years now, there has been an easier way to install Arch Linux directly in the Arch Linux ISO. I talked about it back when it first came out. This is ArchInstall, which is basically a guided wizard for installing Arch. Pretty much the same thing you have from an Ubuntu or Fedora or anything else like that, with the difference being it is TUI based and it's a bit less handholdy than what you get from those. The intention of ArchInstall isn't necessarily to replace the manual installation method. It's for people like me who have done the manual installation method and don't really want to do it again. You don't really feel like spending the time going through it because it's not important and all you actually care about is having a working system. Or if you want to deploy your setup on different systems out there, say you have your desktop and a laptop, say you're doing a fleet installation, all of these things, you don't really want to do it by hand. I talked about it way back when it first came out, and I've talked about it a couple of times since then, but I think a lot of people don't actually know it exists right now because there used to be a message at the top of the ISO being like, hey, you can run ArchInstall. This is an easier way to do it. That message is no longer there. So unless you go and actually read the wiki or you already know about it, you're actually not even going to find it. Also, nowadays, it's really good. Like, it used to be real buggy, where doing anything just slightly out of the ordinary would cause it to immediately break. Yes, there are still problems now, but far fewer than there used to be. So let us go and take a look at the current state. First thing you want to do is make sure you have a network connection. In my case, I do because I am using a Ethernet cable, and let's see if I can actually type. This is totally fine. If you are using Wi-Fi, go and do the Wi-Fi setup. If you're using a mobile connection, go and do that instead. But Ethernet is going to work totally fine. Make sure you do set this up because if you run it without an internet connection, it is going to silently fail. It should throw a warning about that. I don't know why it doesn't. Anyway, if we just go and run ArchInstall, then it's going to go and do some stuff in the background. I think it's going to pull in some packages, various little things. And in a second, it should go and open. This is a very different screen to what we used to have. In the past, it was basically this checklist of things in like a very basic Python script. If you wrote any input that wasn't the expected input, it would just crash. Now it is considerably smoother. I've not been able to make it crash. Now there are areas, like for example, if we go and press escape from some of these menus, even though it says escape should be cancelled, and logically that would make sense to do back, it's not actually going to do that. Starting from the top is the installer language. Now, if you have a 4K screen, or if you have a capture card like I'm doing that for some reason thinks the screen is 4K, if we go into this menu, and then even without setting anything, we leave the menu, it's going to change the font size. Now, On a regular, 1080p display or anything else like that, it's not gonna do that. It's gonna be fine. That is a weird artifact of high resolution displays. If we quit out of this, it is going to set the font properly again. We can then just go back into the installer and it's fine. But it is worth noting, if you don't need to change the language, don't change the language. And if you do need to change the language, good luck. Anyway, moving on from that, that is basically the most notable bug that does currently still exist. Let's go down to the locales. This is one of those areas where you're kind of expected to just know what you are setting here. Yes, there is this help menu on the side, but it's not actually going to help you. It's just going to tell you the keys you can go and use. If you don't know what any of this stuff is, go and read the Arch Wiki. This installer is intended for people that understand how to install Arch, understand what some of these settings are going to be, and simplifies the process because of that. Also, the default settings it has are all pretty sensible default settings for what the ArchInstall guide would normally take you through. Keyboard layout, US, there is a bunch of other layouts you can obviously go and select in here, but even for people that don't live in the US, a lot of people are just using a US layout keyboard. Locale language, again, if you're speaking English, this is a totally fine setting. Yes, there are other ones that do technically exist. You can set ENAU if you really want to. Does it really make that much of a difference? No, it doesn't actually matter. Same with locale encoding. Like, this is another one which don't even bother touching if you don't know what this one is. Just leave it on UTF-8. And then console font. This is one of those ones which a lot of people, even when they've gone through an ArchInstall, don't actually know. This is basically the size of your TTY font. If you're on a high-resolution screen, you're probably going to use something like a, where is it? 32B down here. This is the larger font. This is bold, and that's going to make things easier to read on your TTY. If you just have a 1080p display or lower, it's not really a setting you need to think about. Then we have mirrors and repositories. This is one of those ones which I think could have a little bit of additional stuff. If you want to have full control of everything, go and set things with Reflector. This isn't supposed to be like hyper customization. This is supposed to be get yourself up and running. Here we basically just select the region. When it goes and selects them, I'm going to set it to Australia. It just grab some mirrors, and we're good to go. I'm 99% sure these aren't ordered by speed, because when I tried to install a package post-install, it was very slow. I then used Reflector to order it by speed, and it was much faster. So it gets you a mirror list. It gets you a list that works. But it would be nice to just have a thing where it's like, hey, automatically set up Reflector to go and grab the fastest mirrors, or fastest and most up-to-date, or anything like that. Whilst most of your mirrors are going to come from a mirror list, if for some reason you have a custom mirror, maybe you run your own mirror, you can go and add that here. Also, we can add optional repositories as well. This is your multi-lib testing, core testing, and extra testing. Extra and core are going to be enabled by default as per the default settings of Pac-Man. That's why those are not listed here. Pretty much the only one that regular people are going to enable is multi-lib, and that's pretty much at this point only for Steam. Then you can go and add a custom repository. This is for things like the chaotic AUR. And that's pretty much the only one most people think about. I guess if you have your own repo, or maybe you want to add the CachyOS repo, you can do that here as well. Again, though, this is another menu where pressing escape doesn't actually take you out of the menu. We have to go down to cancel, and then we can go out, and it's weirdly inconsistent where it works and where it doesn't work. One thing to note is, whilst we can now technically go down and just go straight to install, it is going to inform you of things that need to be set to have a working installation. So whilst it is not going to hold your hand, it is going to tell you things which are obviously wrong. Moving on from that, we have the disk configuration. This is one of those things which I really like this for, because for a throwaway setup, which is what I often have on my second machine, where I'm just throwing things on there, deleting it, put another distro on there, delete it, all this good stuff, use a best effort default partition layout. It is not going to be a great setup. you can go through ext4, Butterfs, all this good stuff. Let's go and create a separate home petition. And then it's just gonna, give you something which is sensible. You get a reasonable size root, the home takes up most of it, you get your boot, and that's all. Now, I can absolutely do all this by hand, and I've done this by hand many, many times. But if all I have in this system is one drive, and all I want to do is have something that works, this is great. And for a lot of people, this configuration is, frankly, all you need and all you want. But there are additional things we can do here as well. There is LVM here. There is disk encryption if that is your thing as well. Or if we want, we can go back into petitioning and then choose another setting. We can manually petition it, which is something you're probably only going to do for most people at least, if you have additional drives, if you maybe have an existing drive with something on it and you don't want to nuke it, or if you want to, you can use a pre-mounted configuration. Do note, it's not going to check if that is a sensible configuration, so mileage may vary with that one. I will say when it comes to the manual petitioning, whilst we can go and do this, you are going to have more power with a tool like an F-Disk or something like that, but when we are comparing it to, say, like the Ubuntu installer, the Fedora installer, just your regular distro installers, it's basically got most of what you want. If you have some weird hardware that requires some weird file system and you have some weird setup, yeah, again, as I said, this is not going to be the way to do things. But for a pretty streamlined setup, it's fine. Also, you can just go and configure it outside of the installer and then just make use of the configuration that you already made from that setup. As for swap, this is basically just a question about, do you want to use ZRAM? And then the compression. That is all. That is all you get. No swap petition setting, nothing like that, just ZRAM. Now, I know for some people, you'd like a bit more to be there, and I get it. I would like a bit more to be there as well. But frankly, swap isn't really as useful nowadays as it used to be in the past. It's just some applications out there expect something to be there. So having ZRAM is kind of just this, like, sensible middle ground, I would say. In the bootloader, this defaults to using systemd boot. Now, for people who are obsessed with systemd, systemd boot is not actually a part of systemd. It used to be a project called Gummy Boot, then it got brought into the suite. Big whole story there. If you want to, though, you can go and set it to Grub. Grub is generally my go-to. Yes, I know systemd boot is fine and it's good. I've just always used Grub, so for me, like, it's just my thing. But if you don't want to do any of that, you can just go and use FEStub, which is something on UEFI system where you can just ignore the fact that you even have a bootloader, you just don't need one, and just boot directly from the UEFI. But for people who like other options as well, you do have Lamine and Refined here. Both options which I have never interacted with myself, but I know really have their fans. For now, I'm just going to leave it on systemd boot because that is fine. If you don't know what a unified kernel image is, just don't mess with the setting, right? If you don't know what it is, just leave it as is, or just go to the wiki. But if you know what a unified kernel image is, you probably know if you want one or you don't want one. Plymouth down the bottom here, this is the way that we do splash screens on Linux. There should be other projects that exist out there. Everyone just uses Plymouth. Plymouth is how you get that Fedora logo when you are booting. There are issues here, for example, with disk encryption, with NVIDIA drivers, so a lot of people just don't bother using it. Frankly, I've just never cared, and I don't really... I see my boot screen for such a short amount of time, I don't even care to run it. Also, my monitor usually doesn't power on until it even gets to my bootloader. For the kernel settings, it sensibly just picks the regular Linux kernel, but it does provide the option of a hardened kernel, LTS, and Zen. Generally, I like to keep an LTS kernel around. That's just me. If we press space on it, is going to enable that, and then pressing enter will take us out of that menu, which is confusing, because now it's enter taking us out, not escape. weird design, but it is what it is. Obviously, things like the CachyOS kernel and various other kernels that people might like are not in here. This is just the kernels, which are the mainline regular kernels available in the regular repos. If you want more, you can install them yourself. I've never been one to really mess with my hostname that much, and there's not really anything to set here besides the hostname, which by default is Arch Linux, which for me is kind of what I do for most of my systems, especially for the throwaway ones. Maybe if we're talking about something I use more long-term, I'll name it maybe Arch. Maybe I'll be creative. Ooh, wow. But like, I'm not one to use like real fancy names for things. I know some people love to do it, love to have all of their different machines named in certain different ways. That's just not me. Next, we have authentication. This is one of those ones which it will absolutely complain about because by default, it is not going to make anything for you. It is not setting a root password. If you don't have a root password set, the root account is going to be disabled. Now, for a lot of people, that is totally fine. For me, I like having that available. It is complaining about the strength of my password. I'm totally not setting it to password. Don't you worry about that. Definitely not doing that. Then we have our user account. It is not making a user account for us. If you don't make one, you will only have the root account. Of course, you can go and change this later. Absolutely. However, you probably should just set it up now. I'm going to go and add a user. I'm going to call the user Brodie. Then we can go and set the password for it. Again, totally not using a very weak password. If you don't make it a super user, you're not going to have access to sudo, so I'm going to say yes to that one. And it does have that list of groups at the end. However, there's not actually a way to interact with that list from the interface as it currently stands. There used to be. So I'm not entirely sure why they got rid of it or where the button went. But that is something you will have to do post-install in the current form. U2F devices is for two-factor authentication using like a YubiKey or various other devices you might want to use. Most people probably don't make use of them. This is more of like a corporate thing, but the option is absolutely there for those who want it. Profile is where things get very, very interesting. So Arch Linux, by default, is going to give you a very, very clean install. There's some basic core packages that are going to be installed, and that's pretty much like your glibc, your GNU core utils, some basic other little things, the Linux kernel, all that stuff, but you're not going to have Xorg, you're not going to have Wayland, you're not going to have any desktops or anything like that. So Profile is where we can go and actually go and set that. If we go to Xorg, this is going to be where we can go and install certain drivers. Now, I don't know why drivers are under Xorg. I understand the Xorg drivers being under Xorg, but all the others are here as well. So in my case, I just have an AMD system, so I'm going to set it to that one. But if you want to install everything, you can, and there's not really any harm in doing so. There's not really a reason to do so, but you certainly can. And when it comes to NVIDIA, you have both the open source Novo driver along with the proprietary driver using the open kernel module. The framing of this is a little bit weird, but that's the way it's being framed. Now, there are other drivers you may want to install with older GPUs. If you have like I think a Pascal GPU, you can run the proprietary 580 drivers, which I don't think use the newer module yet. Basically, Arch Linux has the modern drivers in the main repo. If your card doesn't support the modern drivers, it is going to just drop you back down to Novo, and you will have to go and manually set up things yourself. This is not doing something like CachyOS, where it has this really nice hardware detection tool that goes and installs a bunch of different drivers for you. It is still fairly surface level, so NVIDIA is still going to be a lot of, you gotta kind of do it yourself, you gotta deal with the AUR, all that good stuff. But for AMD, for Intel, it is going to be pretty much set up fine. I will say with AMD, it isn't going to do the 32-bit drivers, which are the multi-lib drivers. So that's also a problem if you happen to have multi-lib enabled. That is something you will have to go and manually do yourself. But this is not the only option we have. If we go to type, I selected Xorg before. We can go to a server installation, and this is just a basic set of server packages you might want to install. For most people, though, you're going to go to either minimal or desktop. Desktop gives you the option of a bunch of different desktops being pre-installed for you. Now, it's not going to be like heavily configured or anything like that. We're not talking about like a Kubuntu or something like that. It's going to be pretty much what you get out of the box. When we are talking about the window managers, though, there is a certain level of choice they do need to make. So we have both Niri here and Niri with Dank Material Shell. This was added in the recent update. Qtile, River, Sway, all of these do need to make some level of choice on what packages to install alongside it. I think this is nice if you don't know specifically how to get some of these environments set up. They're all pretty straightforward, or if you do know how to set them up and you just don't want to deal with them, right? You just want to have a quick, easy Niri setup and you don't want to deal with, oh, wait, what packages did I need again? Oh, right, I needed that one and that one and that one and that one. This will just get you up and running. And nicely, it actually does list out the packages for you, so you actually know what is being installed. That is nice. It's not a requirement. They didn't have to do that, but it is nice to know exactly, especially for some of the window manager ones, what you are getting, because there is a lot of random little choices you can make here that different users are gonna choose and not choose. For me, though, with a system like this, I typically just go with the minimal install and just get a clean installation, because especially for a system like this, I just tend to throw it away pretty quickly. So for me, I'll just add what I need to add, then just go about my day, and then delete it, and be good to go. Then we have applications. This isn't applications, this is use cases you might want to enable. Like, do you want to have Bluetooth set up? I don't have Bluetooth in the system. Or do you want to have an audio server? A lot of things you will install will grab an audio server for you. If you're going to install any desktop, it's going to install one for you, but it's nice to have that there anyway. Do you want to have printing, power management, firewall, any additional fonts? I would recommend, even if you're just completely English speaking, you don't use any other character sets, still install the fonts for other character sets, because you're going to eventually run across some Japanese text and you want the text to actually be rendered and not just a box for the missing characters. Go and grab these, grab the Cyrillic ones, grab all of these, the color emoji, all that stuff, and you're pretty much going to be in a good working state. They're not required. You don't have to have them. If you really want to strip things down and just have a slightly lighter system, you don't need them. I would recommend them just for a slightly more pleasant experience. Now, network configuration. If we're just talking about a quick throwaway system, frankly, copying the ISO network configuration to the installation, totally fine. Like, no issue there whatsoever. For something I was actually going to use a bit more long-term, I would use Network Manager. You have both the default backend and the IWD backend, whichever one you want to use, or you can use standalone IWD or the manual configuration. Now, for most setups, you're probably going to be fine just using Network Manager. Unless you have some weird, complicated network configuration, you probably don't need to do manual configuration. But it is nice to be an option there. This isn't an area I've really experienced that much, so I can't really comment on it. But for all my setups, I've just used Network Manager. It's been fine. Pac-Man is somewhere there probably should be more options. We literally just have the option to have colored output or not. There are other cool settings in Pac-Man that probably should be here, like the Pac-Man output and all that sort of stuff. But I guess it's fine. Like, there's nothing you need to set with Pac-Man anyway, so this is just a nice thing to have there. Frankly, this category didn't even need to really exist. Now, additional packages, this is somewhere where if you know what you're looking for, it's really useful, because this is a list of all of the packages. So if you are missing the 32-bit drivers for your GPU, this is where you would grab them. If you want to grab, I don't know, Firefox, for example, you can do that. If you want to grab anything else, that's going to be in here. Now, it's only going to be in the repos you have enabled. If you want to grab something from the AUR, that is not an Arch Linux repo. That is a separate thing that is not handled through that system. For that, you will need to go and install things yourself through the AUR, but this, I think, is basically all you really need to be there. Now, it is an area where you really are going to need to know what you want, because otherwise you're going to be here for a bit. But if this is your second setup, you know, oh, I want to have this, I want to have that, all of these things for your installation, it's nice to have here. It definitely is nice to have. It's better than just having a couple of different categories where there's some like hand-picked applications, like, oh, here are your browsers, here are your text editors, here's the other things where a lot of things that people might be using are just not going to be covered by that, and then eventually you get to a point where there are just too many things being suggested, where it becomes a absolute mess to sort through. So it's kind of easier just to not do anything and just give you a list of it all. But for this setup, there is nothing I need to grab. Then we have our time zone configuration. By default, it's just going to be UTC, but in my case, I'm going to set it to Australia. If we actually filter, we can do that, which is very nice. I'm going to set it to Adelaide. And by default, NTP is enabled. This is your internet time sync. And that's pretty much all you need to know. That's the entire installer there. From here, we don't actually need to go and do an installation. Why did it say no network configuration selected? I forgot to press enter on that one. My bad. Okay, now we're good. That's why it's nice to have warnings. We don't actually have to go and install from here. We can actually save the configuration. And doing this, we can then go and share this with our other machines. So we can go and just pull this in, download Git in the installer, pull this in from a Git repo, and then basically just go and load that onto any of our other machines. I will say there is a slight annoyance with this because it expects you to write out a path, but it doesn't do auto path filling. So you actually need to know the path yourself. If you're gonna have something like this, there needs to be tab completion for that, otherwise it becomes really annoying to fill out. But I guess it's not that big of a deal because it's not like there is a complicated file structure on an Arch Linux install anyway. I will say this probably should have a default path to save to, because if we just press enter here, not a valid directory, which is really annoying. It is going to be the path on the ISO, not the path on the final installed system. So in this case, if we do /root, then we can say, yes, I want to save it to the root. Do you want to encrypt it? No. And now that is going to be saved. From this point though, we can then go and click on install. And if we're sure about the system, we can then do yes. And basically just wait. And when this is done, we are going to have a perfectly fine installed Arch system. Is it going to be the greatest thing out there, the most complicated, amazing Arch system out there? No. Is it going to be something that works? Yeah. Yeah, it is. And if you're just sick of setting up Arch systems, all you have is a pretty simple configuration. This is going to do the job for you. And there we go. A minute later, it's all done. We can exit ArchInstall, we can reboot the system, or if we need to do any post-installation, let's say we want to set up Reflect or anything else like that, that can all be done. But if you want to, just reboot into the system and we should pretty much be good to go. Assuming it actually worked, which I've not had issues with it breaking in quite a while, we should, very shortly, make sure you take out the install medium. My bad. Forgot to do that. Much better. Now we have our installed Arch Linux system. Give it a moment, and there we go. Theoretically, we should still have a network connection if everything else was fine there. Lovely. We now have Arch installed. Arch install is honestly a great tool. I love ArchInstall. It makes my life so much easier when I need these throwaway systems. Yeah. Do I need it? No. No, I could just use literally anything else and it'd be fine. At this point, just having a configuration within like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, just to actually get it installed. That, for me, is great. And maybe for you, it's great as well. Yeah, it's not going to replace something like CacheOS. Absolutely not. But if all you want is just a quick and dirty installed Arch system, ArchInstall is great. But if you want to go a bit further, it can also be extended with a plugin system, and you can basically turn it into this powerful automated installer for basically whatever sort of installation you really want. ArchInstall by itself is a totally fine tool, but it also exists as a library for doing much, much more. So let me know, have you messed around with ArchInstall? Do you use it on a semi-frequent basis, or did you even know it existed? I would love to know. So if you liked the video, go and like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to LiberaPay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and show me your Arch.